market might be a little surprised that maybe it isn't as low as had been anticipated. But does this feel like something of a turning of a corner for the UK economy? The fact that we've got inflation at 2.3%, the target is only 2%.
Well, good morning. I mean, the statistics show this morning that it's not game over for high inflation in the UK. As you've already alluded to, core inflation is still higher than it should be. And the main driver for the drop today is the energy price cap regulation we have here in the United Kingdom, which is welcome, but the Conservative ministers here shouldn't be starting a victory lap. And as we've been saying frequently in the Labour Party, we welcome the statistical improvements, but until people at home feel like the economy has turned a corner and they're better off, I don't think the voters here will think that the economy has turned a corner, no.
OK, so you don't think we've turned a corner for the average consumer in the UK. In terms of the achievement to date, though, on inflation, on bringing it down from double-digit to 2.3%, as I say, not far from the 2% target then, who takes credit for that big drop that we've seen in inflation?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, the institution responsible is the Independent Bank of England. We've been hearing from Andrew Bailey overnight about the numbers today. And look, people are looking forward to cuts, we hope, later in the year to the Bank of England base rate. But as Andrew Bailey's already said, and I think other commentators too, whilst the numbers today are welcome, there's still some distance to go before we can start to enjoy that benefit.
Good morning, Darren. It's Guy. Let's talk about kind of what comes next, therefore. The Conservative Party was talking last week about the fact that were Labour to assume power, that we would see inevitability in tax rises, that you would raise taxes, and that is something that we can almost count on. A, could you rule out at this point that we are going to see further tax rises? And if we do see further tax rises, do you think that would be disinflationary?
Well, look, we're getting into that slightly silly period before the election is called, where the Conservatives say things that are just daft, really, and not reflected on the evidence. Rachel Reeves, the Shadow Chancellor, my boss, has been very clear that we want the tax burden to come down on working people in this country. It's the highest it has been for 70 years. That's why we've supported the Conservative cuts to national insurance at the last two fiscal events. And Rachel's also given a commitment to business, which is that under a Labour government, the level of corporation tax will be frozen for the 5 years of the Parliament. One of the problems we've had over the past few years is that corporation tax has moved around quite frequently, which makes it very hard, as you all know, for businesses to plan for the long term. That won't happen under a future Labour government.
We've got data out also this morning on the public sector net borrowing. It has risen sharply, 19.6 billion. That is the data for the month of April, up from 11 billion, which has been revised higher to 12 for the prior month. The IMF, in its annual assessment of the UK economy, says that the UK needs to find circa £30 billion to stabilise the debt position. Do you recognise that number? Is that useful commentary? And is that something that you are factoring into your thinking?
Well, look, the IMF has pointed out what we already know here in the UK, which is that the UK economy is not in a great shape, and that after 14 years of economic mismanagement from the Conservatives, an incoming Labour government is going to have a very difficult time to start with as we try to turn things around. But if you look at the rest of the IMF report, some of the recommendations they put forward in terms of how you get growth back into the economy, how you bring stability back to our economy and our political systems are essentially aligned with Labour Party policy, and that's going to be our absolute focus.
Can I ask you further about taxes, Darren? You mentioned corporation tax very carefully and how you've got some commitments around freezing that. But the IMF talked about other levers you could pull in terms of increasing taxation. Carbon tax, increasing the VAT base, increasing the base for inheritance tax, capital gains tax, property taxes. Do you offer assurances that you won't increase those? Or maybe you take a different view. Maybe you think you need to increase some of those to fund public services.
No, we've been very clear, as I said, that we don't want taxes to increase on working people. We've made commitments that we're not going to increase the big important taxes that the majority of people pay every month in terms of their income tax and their national insurance. And the answer to really dealing with this in a sustainable way is to not keep increasing the tax burden in this country, which, as I said already, is far too high, but to get growth back into the economy, as well as to reform our public services, which at the moment are not efficient in terms of the public budget that's being spent.
OK, in terms of... So how do we fix public services, Darren, if taxes are not going to rise?
Well, it's not all about spending in public services, if I might say so. Our public services are, on the whole, horribly inefficient. And so it costs more because they're not very productive. Public service reform has not really been on the agenda in the UK for many, many years now. But if you look to my colleague Wes Streeting, who's the Shadow Secretary of State for Health, if you look to Bridget Phillipson, Shadow Secretary of State for Education, if you look at Liz Kendall, Shadow Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, they all talk about public sector reform, both in terms of the way the schemes are designed, but also importantly, the way we use technology to invest in and improve the productivity of those services and the effective targeting of the resources that we have. Now, that will take a bit of time, of course, to roll out, but that is the long-term answer to getting public sector budgets under control whilst improving the delivery of public services to those that rely on them.
We've just got a statement coming through from the Prime Minister's office saying inflation, Darren, is back to normal, quote. What do you think about that? Back to normal. Is that where inflation feels like it is right now?
Well, I think Conservative ministers should be a little cautious in their commentary, given that core inflation is still higher than we would like it to be and higher today than we were expecting it to come out as. We, of course, welcome the drop in the energy price cap, which has driven down the headline figure today. But we know that the UK is particularly exposed to international markets on gas prices, which is one of the reasons we suffered so much in the first place. So that's why Rachel Reeves, my boss, is giving a speech today at Chatham House on securenomics and the need for a resilient energy market at home here in the UK to try to prevent those types of spikes in the future.
You were just mentioning to Anna the desire to see reform within public services, and that would potentially raise the potential of the public side of the economy and the wider economy as a result. We're spending the morning talking about inflation here in the UK. In some ways, the UK has suffered from inflation more than others because it struggles with productivity. Ultimately, isn't the way that we manage productivity, make the economy more resilient, is to make it more productive? How quickly do you think you can raise the potential of the economy, and how far do you think you can take it?
Well, look, there's a number of short, medium and long-term answers to this, but Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party, has been very clear to all of us that he wants to move away from short-term announcements and to roll up our sleeves and deal with the structural issues the country faces, even if that means that goes beyond an electoral cycle. That's why we talk about a decade of national renewal in our country, because we think it's going to take that long to deal with some of these deep problems that we are facing. And look, productivity in the public sector is a difficult job, but it's only government that can get on and do that. But we've also got to help the private sector, whether that's with reforms to the skills and training regime, whether it's around access to technology and technology diffusion, or making sure that people are back being active in the labour market to improve productivity in the private sector too.
We heard from the Chancellor yesterday, Darren, Chancellor Jeremy Hunt, talking about some of the comments that the IMF made, and they made this comment around debt and the debt position of the UK. They also upgraded slightly their forecast for UK growth, and he used this to suggest that this was a good reason to shake off the unjustified pessimism that exists around the UK's prospects. Do you think the Labour Party is guilty of unjustified pessimism on the UK's prospects?
No, I think the Labour Party reflects the view of the British people, and until we think that the country has gotten back on track and is growing again and providing opportunities to people across the country, we'll continue to highlight the challenges that we think need fixing.